Alrighty, we're going to take a look at the last section in Chapter 6, which is graphing radical functions. For this section, you're going to want to write down this equation. Sometimes it will just be the square root sign here, sometimes it will have a cube root sign here. But the transformations are going to be the same. These transformations have shown up in most of these chapters so far, so hopefully we have them down. They still represent the exact same thing. If we do not, make sure we write them down. So this A out front is in charge of stretching or compressing or reflecting across the x-axis. So if the A is a number greater than 1, it is stretching it. If the number for A is between 0 and 1, it is compressing it. And if that A is negative, then it's reflecting it across the x-axis. So if that number in the A spot was -5, then negative would mean it's reflecting it across the x-axis, and the 5 itself would mean that it's stretching by a factor of 5. So there would be two transformations. This H right here underneath the square root symbol moves it left and right. It's the opposite of what you would think. So if it is positive, it's moving it to the left. If it is negative, it's moving it to the right. This K is in charge of moving the function up and down. If it is positive, it's going up. If it is negative, it is going down. So let's take a look at some examples. For this first one, we have y equals -1/2 times the square root of x minus 3 plus 1. So we're going to first take a look at the transformations, and then we'll take a look at how the graph looks. So to start off with, we have a negative, so that means it's reflecting it across the x-axis. The half is a number between 0 and 1, so that is compressing the function by a factor of a half. The -3 means it's going to go to the right 3, and then the +1 means it's moving up 1. So we write down our transformations, and then if we want to go ahead and graph it, we're going to go to our graph. We're going to clear out the equations that are there, and then we're going to type it in. If it is a fraction like this, I would put that -1/2 all inside parentheses times then the square root of x minus 3 so x minus 3 plus 1. Then we're going to click graph. And you can see if it is a square root problem, then what our graph is going to look like. And it's just going to be a half of a parabola. So it's just going to curve downwards kind of like this, that you can see it moved to the right 3, it went up 1, and then it's compressed, so it's kind of goes down a little bit further, and then instead of curving upwards, if it was positive, then it is curving downwards. So let's take a look at this next one. We have 3 times the square root of x plus 2 minus 4. So the 3 means it's stretched by a factor of 3. The 2 means it goes to the left 2 and then down 4. So we have our transformations. We're going to take a look at this one. As we're typing it in, a couple things that we should be expecting to get on the graph of this one. We should see it moves to the left 2, and it is going down 4. So that would make our point, and then it's going to be stretched by a factor of 3. So then this is this one. Notice when it's stretched, it's going to have a sharper curve to it. It wasn't reflected, so the curve is going up instead of going downwards like the last problem. But when it was compressed, notice it just didn't have as sharp of a curve like this one. Alrighty, now this next one we're going to take a look at. Instead of square roots, it's cube roots. The transformations are going to be the same. The graph is just going to look slightly different. So the 2 out front means it's stretched by a factor of 2, goes to the left 1, and then down 4. So if we go ahead and graph this one with a cube root symbol now, we have 2 times. If we click the math, they already have a cube root symbol in there. So we go to the cube root of x plus 1, and then minus 4. Click graph. And notice this is kind of looking like a slanted S or a curvy S. And another thing to notice, it went to the left 1 and then down 4, and that gives you right in the middle of that curvy S. and then it's stretched, so you can kind of see that S is stretched out. Alrighty, let's take a look at this. Next one's going to be compressed, so you can see what that looks like too. So to start off with, this 3 out front, notice it's 3 minus a half. I would go ahead and subtract that 3 over. Okay, and we can't combine those because this negative a half is all times those, so this negative a half is connected with this. Okay, so we're just going to instead subtract that 3, or it's positive, sorry, add that 3 over to the other side, and just switch the order. So we'd have negative a half times the cube root of x minus 2 plus 3. It still equals the same thing. If you want to graph this top one, you can do so, but this bottom one will help us with our transformations. So the negative means that it is reflected across the x-axis. The half means it's compressed by a factor of a half. Move to the right 2 and then up 3. So let's take a look at this one. So we have negative a half and then we go to math, we go to that cube root, so down to 4, then x minus 2, and then plus 3. We click graph. Alrighty, now for this one, a couple things that you should notice. It's since it was reflected across the x-axis, instead of curving up, it's going to be curving down. Another thing, since it was compressed, it's not going to be stretched out or as long as the first one. It's going to be less of a curve, and then it's moved to the right 2, and then up 3 will be that middle part of the slanted S.